Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Brent Aiken, David Pruitt, and Russell Martin. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, David Pruitt.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website, www.studentministryconversations.org, where you can find all of our previous episodes, show notes, blog articles, and much, much more. Our goal is that you are inspired, encouraged, and that the things that you hear on this podcast would equip you to be a better student pastor for the church that you are serving in. All right, let's get to it. So today is a little bit different. So I had originally had a podcast episode ready to go. We have actually tried to record. We recorded the entire first episode, and then when we got the footage back, we realized that it didn't actually capture any of our guests. And so we tried re-recording today, and for the same reason that it didn't capture his, it didn't capture mine this time. And so with that comes pivoting. I think that's a whole episode in ministry that we can go dive into. But sometimes in life, things just don't go exactly according to plan. But the beautiful thing in that is that it allowed us the opportunity to have a conversation that Brent and I have talked about doing over the last couple of months or so, but it was actually an idea that my wife has had, and I think Brent has talked about it with his wife as well, but actually having our wife on the podcast, and so talking about spouses in ministry today. So like I said, it definitely gave the opportunity for us to kind of pivot into something that we've wanted to talk to for a while, but I think sometimes it can be a little bit of a challenge because it's a topic that we don't necessarily want to talk about out loud. There's an expectation that comes with our families and especially our spouses, and I think there's a lot of conversations that could be had here. So we wanted to just start the conversation with me and my wife. And so I would like to introduce you guys to Kelcie Pruitt. She is my beautiful and awesome wife. And I'm just super, super grateful that she was willing to join me on the podcast. She found out about this about 30 minutes ago. So, Kelcie, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am... Yes, of course. I don't know what to say about myself other than I am David's wife. I am currently a teacher at a Christian school where we live. This is unfortunately my last year at this Christian school only because we are moving on, but hopefully I can be a teacher there. And I'll talk more about being a teacher, I guess, but I like to read. That's really my personality right now, is reading, so...
Yeah.
I'm a mom. I don't know what else to say about me. I grew up, I don't know, do you want a little bit of my spiritual background?
Of course, always.
Okay, so I have been in church almost my entire life, and through that I've been through many different variations of my faith, some of them weird, some of them exciting, some of them just kind of mundane, but I've just been through different parts of my life because I've been a Christian my whole life. And I really just think that's all to say about me at this moment. I don't know.
We do have a son named Noah. He's 7 years old and awesome. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very.
I don't know if you said you've actually been a teacher for 5 years, but you actually...
Mm-hmm. This is my 5th school year.
Mm-hmm. But you actually got a degree in teaching but didn't go straight into teaching. You want to talk about that?
Sure. I had a weird student teaching experience. Everybody did the best that they could with what was happening, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But I went and I worked in corporate or in an office, which was good and hard a lot of times. And then I had the opportunity to become a teacher, which I had gone to school, but technically I'd gone to school to study to teach Spanish. But now I am an elementary school teacher, which is a really good fit for me, I think. So much better than high school, which I do talk about later.
All right, so let's just start to dive into this. I wanted to, it's always interesting doing these. Typically, I will either know the guest or I won't know the guest, and so there's a little bit of conversation, but it's a little bit weird interviewing my wife when I know the answer to all the questions that I'm going to ask, but I also think it kind of makes for a fun and quirky little episode. So I tried to do this one a little bit differently. My typical format for these is I come up with 2 to 3 questions and try to just sort of formulate the episode from there. But I also know that my wife is very much a type A personality. She wants all the expectations and questions laid out before we get started. So I came up with a lot more questions than 3 so that she could actually go through them and think through them and all that good stuff. So hopefully that was helpful. So pro tip to those that are listening, if your wife needs more, give her more, I guess, which I do think is on topic. So I want to start with this question. And you kind of talked a little bit about this, but I would love to hear a little bit more. Can you share a bit about your journey as a spouse in ministry, and how did you first become involved?
Okay, so I have my notes and stuff here, so if I look down, that's what's happening. I first became involved with David's particular ministry when he and I began dating, because he was interning at a church, and so I would go with him and I would help as much as I could there. And then after we got married, I was like your co-leader, right? And then a couple years into it, I really realized that youth are awesome. I like youth. However, I do not mesh well with youth, mostly because, I don't know, they're just scary. And there's a bunch of personality things that are my fault, not their fault. So I just realized that youth probably wasn't a good fit for me. And so I transitioned to children's ministry, and then about around that same time, I became a teacher at a Christian school, and that is a big ministry in my life. It's like what I do for several hours of my day. The joy of teaching at a Christian school is I get to teach people how to read and do all that stuff, but also I get to teach them about Jesus, and we get to memorize scripture, we get to pray together, we get to ask questions, be curious, silly, all the things that can happen sort of in a traditional school setting. However, it's more Jesus here, and I really do enjoy that, and that is a big ministry. And then I also transitioned from like youth or whatever, but I'm still in ministry with you in that I do worship ministry. Like I'm on the worship team, and I'm involved in several other ministries in our church that aren't like children. So
yeah, that was one of the beauties of being in kind of a smaller church. We get the opportunity to do a lot of things together. It's actually kind of interesting with the worship side of things. I just really needed a bass player, and I remember one day, I can't remember if I asked you or if you just volunteered to learn, but I needed a bass. I think it was one of those situations where I just really needed a bass player, and I pretty much had filled everything else on our worship team. And I remember, I feel like, yeah, you approached me, and it was more of a, hey, bass sounds easy-ish. And so I think you were also maybe considering piano at the time as well. Well, I mean, no, but you were kind of learning, though, weren't you?
no.
I thought you had learned from somebody else.
I did try to do a little bit, but I wasn't like, I was serious about it, but it wasn't like I didn't really like it. And it has nothing to do with the teaching. It just had more to do with, so it's a little more complicated than I want to go.
Right. And so, we have a little bit of a joke with it. But when she started learning bass, she got really good really quickly. And as someone who's been a musician for a while, it's like, hey, let's go into the advanced stuff. And she likes to say she puts the bass in basic. And so she didn't want to go any further. She didn't want to go crazy like musician. She's like, hey, here's the bass. Here's the notes. They are going to be mostly put where they belong, and that's what you're going to get. Kind of like, children's ministry, you get what you get, don't throw a fit, kind of thing. And it's been kind of a cool thing for us to do something that we're serving the church and we're serving a need, but it's also time together. And we'll talk about this a little bit. All my friends know that I am a bit of a workaholic, especially when it comes to church and ministry. And so sometimes the time that we get together are, as far as like the refreshing type things are, to me, when we get to do worship, and when we get to do we're in a marriage Bible study and stuff like that. And those are times where we get to do it, like we get to serve together in a way that still feels very life-giving for us, or at least for me. But then there's other things like serving meals together and various things like even this podcast, So I think there's a lot of cool things that come with that. So next question I wanted to ask you is this, and really I want to look at both sides of this, but what are some of the joys and rewards that you have experienced in ministry, both personally and then us together?
So joys are always especially in my school, is seeing the kids remember Bible verses and then seeing them apply them in different ways. And then also, we tell Bible story. I talk about the Bible. We have whole Bible lesson, and I talk about the Bible lesson. And oftentimes, it's really cool to me to see them remembering them and then bringing them up at different times. We were talking about Matthew, I think, and then I was saying something, and they were like, yeah, Matthew, and how he was a tax collector, and no one liked him, and I was like, yeah, exactly, and just seeing them, kind of make those connections, that is something that I just really find joyful and rewarding. Also, they ask me tricky questions sometimes, and I don't necessarily always have an answer, or sometimes the answer is, go ask your mom or dad or whoever, but I like that they're curious. That is rewarding and joyful for me, because I think curiosity is awesome. Also, so ministry with you and I is when I was involved in youth, and even now, I know the youth kids, and so seeing them, seeing how they're living and just seeing how they've grown and all the things after everything that we have, after their years with us and learning from us and just seeing how their lives are, that's really rewarding to me. So
on the flip side of that, what are some of the unique challenges that you have faced in this role?
Some of the challenges some of the unique challenges are realizing my limitations with the youth age kids. I really wanted to be involved with you, and even just how our personalities kind of mesh, and sometimes it's not it gets in the way of youth ministry because of, I don't know how to say it where I don't sound like I'm a jerk, but sometimes I'll be well, actually, because I'm a well, actually person, and little kids, I don't do that as much as apparently with youth kids, because I want to impress them. I don't know, it's a lot. But that was my limitation, and that was something that I had to realize because it was a challenge, and I didn't want to be a hindrance to you. But also a challenge for me as a youth minister's wife is balancing, sharing my husband's energy, / his time with youth people. I want him to pour into them and love them, but also Mr. Workaholic sometimes gives a little too much and there's not enough. And so that's a challenge that I've had to work through and pray through and find contentment within myself, and like manage my expectations. So those are some challenges.
And also calling
also
me out.
being a teacher. Yeah, and then like speaking to you when I need to speak to you about it. And then also as a teacher during the day and then doing children's ministry for my church, a challenge I sometimes face is like, but it's also kind of a good thing, is that like I've spent all day teaching children, and then I go to try to teach them on Wednesday, and like we're all just tired because we've all been at school all day, and like balancing that, but then also that gives me a unique perspective and helping, like, because sometimes children's minister, not necessarily the ministers, but sometimes volunteers, naturally as humans, get a little like, oh, why aren't you listening to me, or whatever, and they feel like there's not seeds being planted, but like, or they're not behaving the way you expect them, but it's like, well, they've been at school all day, they're tired. There can be a little bit of a balance, and I've been able to like help bridge that a little bit.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was something I hadn't ever even considered in all my time as, being a youth pastor and doing ministry, is that sometimes kids are just spent, and that doesn't just stop at children. I mean, that's students, that's adults. I mean, sometimes we get to church and we want to be all in and we want to enjoy the experience, and some days just our day takes all of it out of us. And I know as youth pastors, as you guys are listening, I know there are times where you get into a Wednesday night or Sunday night or whenever you guys meet for youth ministry, and I don't know about you guys, but there have been times where you go into it and you're just like, I am praying that God just gives me the strength and the energy to get through tonight, and not just like get through it as in, okay, let's just hurry up and get done with this, but I mean to do it well and to feel like you have the energy that these students and your volunteer team deserve, because it's never lost on me that people take time out of their busy day, their busy week, and all the other expectations that they have to come and be a part of this thing. And we know it's important, but we do need to consider that. We need to consider that these kids, these students, these adults, they've had an entire day, and sometimes they're just spent, and sometimes they just need to sit back and absorb, and that's okay. And that was something that Kelcie really helped me to see. Not that I think I had like a big issue with it, but I remember her having a conversation about a volunteer that was kind of struggling with that. She wasn't mean about it or anything, but just as we were kind of talking about our day and how children's ministry went and how youth ministry went, she had brought that up, and it was just something I'd never really considered. And so I think that's a cool thing that God has been able to use someone like her, who is a teacher, who's in school and understands what that means, to just be fried from the end of the day and to come to church, and sometimes like sitting in almost a school-like format and answering questions when you're already exhausted can be difficult. And so maybe that's something to consider in your youth ministries. Plan ahead. Like if you know when your students are testing, that is a huge week, and a lot of these students are spent. Maybe that's the day you have a game night or a movie night or something. If your series or whatever your youth ministry calendar has, if you have the flexibility to maybe consider maybe doing something a little bit more low key, or maybe, it doesn't even have to be like a movie night. Maybe it's like you do prayer stations, and tonight we're gonna focus on praying and doing like worship, or just something a little bit more low key, or even just like a devotional in a game or whatever. I don't ever want to forsake our time, because we only have so much time with these students to be able to minister. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not just perpetuating playing a bunch of games or whatever, but maybe think ahead to knowing those times where students are typically spent, and mapping out your ministry to work around that.
I mean, and sometimes Jesus, I'm sure, it doesn't get mentioned, but I'm sure sometimes Jesus was like, we're just going to eat today. I'm not going to preach to y'all. We're just going to eat and chat. I mean, the disciples loved him, and I don't know that it was always just because he, was preaching at them all the time. I think part of it was like, we just hung out.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Well, and
you could just use
the
that
Bible
if you
talks
want.
about Jesus going and getting rest, and maybe we can find ways to apply that in ways where we as pastors have a unique role in our students and volunteer teams' lives in modeling what that means. And obviously, it's been mentioned that I'm a workaholic. I do not model rest well, but I'm trying to get better at that. And so one of those things is maybe understanding that today we need to scale back just a little bit.
Yeah, today's fellowship day.
Yeah.
Because how else are you going to build relationships? I don't know. I'm not in youth ministry anymore, so I'll stop talking. But in children's ministry, sometimes I do know that there are like days where it's like we just kind of hang out with them so that we can get to know them a little bit more. But and even in the class, like sometimes I'll have to say like, okay, I'm just going to ask y'all questions about yourselves, or let y'all talk about all the things where your brain goes.
Yeah. I think that's good.
And that's when you really get to know them. So
yeah, I mean, I've been a big proponent for that. Is it's in those times when you think maybe you're just chilling, you're just relaxing or whatever, but it's in those times where students' walls and their boundaries sort of come down. And so when you're in the middle of teaching, there's a level of walls, and you can like see it in their eyes when those walls come up, and they're kind of in a like, okay, I'm about to have to answer some hard questions that maybe I'm not ready, or maybe I don't feel qualified to answer. And so you see those walls kind of come up. But if you're playing like the game of spoons, or some random game with your students, you see that those walls kind of come down, and those are the moments where you can actually learn a lot about that student, especially maybe a student that's not super vocal. I have found in our time, it's when you lean into those moments, when you lean into the times where like maybe they're just talking about praying for their cat or something that you might think is silly. It's in those times that when you give them the trust of just listening to them, they're going to give you trust when you want them to answer a question or whatever it might be. And so I think being able to use those tools can be really helpful to you in your ministry, especially if you're trying to minister to someone who's not really giving you a lot. But let's move on. How do you navigate the boundaries between your personal and professional lives, particularly when it comes to sharing ministry? This is where I'm about to get roasted, y'all.
I don't really know the answer to this question. So I said, I think like just making boundaries between like, okay, what's conversation that I should have here or not have here. Just making sure you have time management and rest, like making sure you have adequate rest. I don't know. Maybe I didn't understand that question very well.
So the one thing that I was thinking, and this has been kind of a cool and unique time for us in our ministry, as our ministry is actually shifting. We've been here nearly 10 years, and so we're going through a move and considering what's next for us. And so I know what church I'm going to, and I know what my role is. Kelcie does not yet. And so we're not sure where she's going to work. And so there's that, she's used the words kind of this, existential kind of situation where you're like, I don't really know what my future holds. And I think there's maybe some beauty in that, because we've been very much in the known and the comfortable for a long time. And, we're in a good groove. She's been in her job for 5 years, and before that she was in a different job for 5 years. And so, that there's a joke there too. It seems like every 5 years you're starting over, which I feel terrible about, but please go ahead.
Earlier, we recently had some butterflies. So they were first caterpillars, and then they formed their chrysalises, and then they hatched. And my class released our butterflies today, but some other teachers still have theirs. And so I was kind of talking to another teacher about that, like, I'm nervous about it, how I have to go and whatever. And then I was like, but really, because I just got my groove, and maybe that's what the caterpillars feel when they're in their chrysalis. They're like, there's just a caterpillar, and now it's time to hatch or whatever. Anyway, I don't remember where we went with that, but it was kind of that, like, I'm excited to spread my wings and see what's next. And like, maybe this time here at my school has been an opportunity for me to like form my chrysalis, and now I get to go be a butterfly.
Definitely. I think it also gives us a fresh and clean slate, in the sense that in talking with the pastor of the church that we are headed to next month, that's one of the things that we're trying to do better, so to speak, is having healthier boundaries and, taking days off and taking vacations and all the things that are really, really healthy for us in the long run. I think I have done ministry the only way I know how to, and that's all in. So this has given me that unique opportunity to take a step back and figure out what our boundaries are. I don't know about you guys, but I have always gone into ministry in an all-in format where I look at every opportunity as a chance to minister in one way or another and to love on people. I like to think of it as, by the time I go home, can I honestly say that I did the best that I could today? Even if like the best I have is 10%, because of other things that have drained my, I have students that call it kind of their social battery, so to speak. Like, sometimes we don't have 100% to give. Sometimes we only have 10%, but did I give that 10% today? And so whether I'm all in at 10% or I'm all in at 100%, did I do all that I could for as long as I could? I would love to know that when I die someday, that people can honestly say I gave it everything I could to make a difference for the kingdom of God. And if people can say that, then I'm content. But at the same time, I've got to rethink some of my boundaries, in the sense that, if my legacy is, hey, he was a really, really good youth pastor who was dedicated and loved Jesus and cared so much, but sacrificed his wife and son, that's not okay. And so this gives me the unique chance to take a step back and look at ways to do that healthier, so that I can be an even better youth pastor and an even better father and an even better husband. And if I can do those things, then I felt like we'd be even more successful. And that's a cool thing. And so I think that's one of the things that we're learning to do together. And it's been really cool too, because in the midst of this, we joined a marriage Bible study knowing we were leaving, and it actually worked out in the window where it's a 6-week Bible study, and the last week is our last week here. So it worked out really, really cool, because we were able to kind of think of those things before we leave, and then we've talked about doing the Bible study together after we get settled in, and like seeing if our answers have changed in a sense. And so it's been really kind of a unique, and I keep saying the word unique. It's been a cool time for us to sort of rediscover ourselves in ministry, and what is expected of us. And one of the questions as we were interviewing that Kelcie had was, hey, what's my role? And I think that's a genuine thing that probably needs to be talked about more. Is there is an expectation, sometimes written expectation, sometimes not really so written, that spouses have to do all the things in ministry, especially pastors' wives or husbands. I mean, whatever the role is. So whatever your spouse is hired to do, there's almost an expectation that we're paying him or her, so you should also be involved in some way because you benefit from that. And I think that's a really dangerous way to look at ministry, because the truth is God called me to be the youth pastor of this church, not my wife. And though she is a huge help in our ministry, and as we had already shared, she's gotten to do a lot of incredible things in our church, through the school, through even the daycare at our church for a period when our son was there. Although you've been able to do some things even after he left. But like with our Celebrate Recovery, being able to cook, running media stuff, she's really good with media too. In a sense, she is probably as dedicated, honestly, to the ministry here as I am, but she doesn't get paid for any of it. And so I think it can be really, really dangerous if we're not careful that we will sort of abuse, I don't want to use the word abuse, but I can't think of a better word, ministry spouses because we pay the... So what are your thoughts on that, Kelcie? Because obviously as a spouse person, you are not on the payroll, but sometimes that expectation can be there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, sometimes like I feel, I'm not saying that it's the thing, but I feel like I'm expected to be at, not necessarily every youth event, but like I'm expected to be at church all the time. I'm expected to help with this or that or this and that. And I'm actually a homebody, so sometimes it's very hard for me. I'm also an overthinker, so sometimes that's really hard for me. And so I don't know what else to say about that because I think you nailed it on the head. Like, I just wanted to know, like, if I have to be gone for some reason, if it'll be the end of the world and look bad on you or whatever.
Yeah, and that's kind of the sad thing, though, you know? And I realize that in our contexts, sorry about that, in our context, especially as youth pastors or for some of our listeners, maybe your youth and children, and I know we do have a few senior pastors that do listen, but we really don't have control over the church's perception on that. But I do think that we can help change the narrative in some ways. You know, we may not have direct control or influence over how our church views our spouse, but we can also champion for our spouse and say, hey, you know, and we could do it in a very graceful and gentle way that just says, hey, you hired me, you didn't hire her. And if your church can't get behind that, then I think some deeper conversations need to happen between you and your pastor, leadership team, whatever you have at your church. But I think personally, I would say that if a church expects that level of commitment from your spouse, then they probably need to rethink. And I know there are arguments on both sides of that. So I'm certainly open to those things because I just think about like my ministry here is so much richer because Kelcie's here. Our church is really, really blessed because Kelcie's here. And we mentioned several of the roles that she has. And I really do think all of those ministries would hurt without her. But at the same time, she's a human being who teaches and has a really tough job. And she needs to have the freedom to say, I really need a Sunday off, or I don't feel good. I'm just not feeling very good, and so I need to be able to take a Wednesday night off and not feel bad about it. And I think that's hopefully changing for you. But I do think that realistically, if it could be a situation where you don't have to feel bad because you do so much, being able to not feel bad for not being able to be there is something that needs to happen, in my opinion.
And that might be a Kelcie self-imposed thing. It's probably, and I think that's why you said what you said, like perceived expectation. But so I guess in our context, some of that might be all on me, and I do know that like some like maybe these are more for pastors' wives. Pastors' wives I know probably have higher expectations on them. They definitely are expected to be everywhere, know everything, and all that stuff. And that's a whole different conversation, right? But some of that might be inflicted, and so I just wanted to throw that out there in case anyone's like, we never expected that. And I'll be like, okay, well, it's a self thing. Okay, I'm aware.
But I do know that just in my conversations with other pastors' wives, I don't think there's a single pastor's wife that doesn't feel some level of pressure there, or ministry spouse in general. I keep saying wife because my context is wife, obviously, but I know that there are, all kinds of different roles. And so, like, children's ministers and youth pastors that, several are women. And so I need to stop saying wife. I'm trying to say spouse. But again, my context is wife. So,
Right.
But here's another good question for you. And we've kind of talked about this, but let's maybe get a little bit more specific. How do you balance your role as a spouse in ministry with other responsibilities such as like family, your career, your own personal interests? Like, how do you balance it?
What number was that?
Number 10. I jumped a lot.
Okay, so, oh no, I don't know. Sorry. Ask me again.
How do you balance your role as a spouse in ministry with other responsibilities such as like having a family, a career, or even personal interests? How do you balance it all?
So make sure that it's like just a matter of time management, right? But making sure that I stay connected to you, not in the ministry side, but like staying connected to you in the personal way. Like going on dates and like watching TV, relaxing, or doing whatever fun things we like to do. And then the same with my son, like making sure I spend one-on-one time with my son and interacting with him and getting to know, like interacting with his interests and all the things. And also just like spending time outside of ministry and not like thinking about it, even though I think about everything all the time. And just like, I personally carry my Kindle around because, like I said, I like to read, so I bring my Kindle around and I'll just like spend time in my interest whenever there's a free moment. So that's how I think you balance it, is making sure to stay connected and not making it always about work, or about ministry, like trying to be like, okay, I don't know, it sounds really type A or whatever, and I don't think I'm type A. I think I'm like type A.5 or like AB, like I'm in the middle. No, but I'm just trying to say like I'm A, but I'm also B, so I'm like somewhere in the middle. Like anyway, I'm not like quite A, but I'm not B. I'm 8.5. There you go. So like having like a time, like okay, so it's like okay, I don't know. This is gonna sound probably really weird, but it's kind of like when Dwight shuns Andy in The Office, and he's like, unshun. It's like, so he's like, no, and then unshun or whatever he says about the bouncy castle, I think. But like, okay, time out on the shun the ministry talk for a minute. We're gonna just talk about like things that are a little bit outside of that, even though a lot of our interests do correlate with the ministry, like music, like and all that stuff. Maybe not my interest as much as your interest, but and then like, okay, now it's time, like, okay, let's time in or whatever, unshun the ministry talk, or like, I know there's like when you're, or like making sure you're doing the same thing with your friends, like hanging out with your friends who are either at your church or not at your church, and like balancing and finding like okay, today we are not talking about church, because I have friends who like work in the church, right? So it's like, okay, today's no church complain day, and we're just going to talk about, I don't know, books or emo days or whatever, like, or just our kids or whatever, like talking about something other than the church. And then some days it's like, it's too much and we have to vent, and then that's not really balancing it. But like there's ebb and flow in your relationships, and then especially trying really hard to not hide it from your kid, but also not like let them see everything. Like you don't want them to, like, giving them a fair balance of how life really is but isn't, because childhood should be magic, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that I've tried really hard. Like, that's kind of my litmus test of when I'm overdoing it. When my son starts to get upset because I'm at work again, and when it's just like, when he starts to get real clingy, it's usually because I'm not spending enough time with him. And so that's when I'm like, okay, time to close the computer and, metaphorically, whatever I'm doing, it's time to stop and just be with my family and understand that whatever pressures you have, the truth is this: whatever you are working on, for the most part, can wait till tomorrow, or even wait till next week. Sometimes even wait till next month. Obviously, if you're like about to lead a disciple now on Friday and it's Thursday, you probably have some things that you need to get done, and we understand that the couple of days before an event and the couple of days after the event, you might have a little bit of things to do, but at some point you do need to take a step back and go, okay, I've been at camp for 2 weeks and my family really needs a day of me not doing anything other than just being home. And sometimes that might mean, okay, you've been gone for 2 weeks, so now she is going to go to our room and close the door and read a book and drink some coffee, and I'm going to take our son because she is at her wit's end because she has been single momming it for the last 2 weeks, kind of thing. And so that's part of the balance too, is, tag your it, do the dishes, take out the trash,
teamwork.
all that good things that comes with it, which I am not great at and I'm trying to get better at.
He's getting better.
Thank you. She actually put that in her notes because, again, she's type A.5 and she sent me her notes and said, "Are these okay?" They're fine. They're your answers. It doesn't matter if it's not a test. She's such a teacher, but also perpetual student too, who got incredible grades and always wanted to do
Well, here's the deal.
great.
We should all be perpetual students. We should all always be learning.
Yes, that's the point of this conversation, right?
That was a very teacher thing
Yes, it
to
was.
say.
Can you share any practical tips or strategies for building a strong and resilient marriage while navigating the challenges of ministry life? We kind of talked about that, but do you have any other practical things?
I don't know, setting up a personal Bible study that you have with your spouse, praying specifically with your spouse, spending that time to do that, hanging out with friends in or outside of the church, and other peers. So I think I actually accidentally answered that earlier. So it's kind of the same though.
Yeah.
Just making sure that we set aside time where we're still getting to know each other and hanging out with your peers and, friends and, just having some fun.
I think that's a big thing.
Which, not that church isn't fun, but
sometimes it's
when
not.
you're working and doing ministry and pouring, it's not all fun.
Yeah, it's not all. Sometimes it can be downright draining, and so being able to lean into each other.
Allow yourself to be off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and allow yourself to have some okay, I'm not the youth pastor right now. Not that you're gonna go crazy and do sinful stuff, but I'm an adult now.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
yeah.
just David.
Let's be honest, youth pastors can be
Kelcie.
just as much kids and children's ministers for that matter. We can be just as much kids as the kids and students we're working with. And so.
I just meant I'm just a human right now. I'm not a pastor, but that doesn't mean going and getting wild, okay?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that.
But I also think you hit it pretty well when you said, it's kind of the whole shun, unshun kind of thing. Having and being very vocal. I mean, that's been a big pillar of our relationship. Again, she is very type A, and I like expectations, and so we were nerdy when we were dating. And one of the boundaries that we set before deciding to date was that we had to be vocal and honest about what we're struggling with, and what we meant by that was, if we are overdoing it at the church, if I'm spending too much time here, then she needs to be able to have the freedom and the ability to just say, dude, you're doing too much. Like, I need you to, like, be more present at home. And I need to not get butthurt about it, which I think I do a pretty decent job of not getting upset, because in those moments I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right, you know. But in those times, you need to be listening to your spouse. You need to be listening to your kids, because when they say that you're overdoing it, you need to just believe them. And even if you're like, well, but I'm busy, this is a busy season, and you knew what you were getting into, yeah, but that doesn't mean that she can't still, or your spouse can't still say, okay, yeah, but I need you to be home, and needing to be able to set those boundaries. And then you need to be willing to, I guess, eat a slice of humble pie and just say, okay, and apologize and move forward and make it right. And you can get back to it when your spouse is ready. But again, that's just part of the give and take of all of that. So I just want to say thank you again to you guys who are listening. This was a very impromptu, like I said, we've talked about doing a podcast like this, but we've never really mapped out what it would be. And so when this opportunity came up, it was more of a, hey, let's just have an open, honest conversation about where we are and what this looks like. I think this opens up an opportunity for us to maybe do other kinds of conversations like this. I love the idea of maybe possibly like a panel of sorts, where maybe we can get all of the student ministry conversation host together with our spouses and have an honest conversation about it. Or maybe, you know, we as hosts just disappear and our spouses take an episode and talk to each other without us listening, so to speak. I don't know. I think it opens up some cool opportunities, because the truth is, Kelcie, like me, is very, very heavily involved in the ministries inside and outside of our church. But I know that there are other situations where maybe a ministry or staff, we'll just say pastor's spouse, maybe isn't so involved. And I think that opens up a conversation as well. And so if you were listening and you're like, hey, that made me think of this particular thing, please reach out to us. Please have that conversation with us. This whole podcast is a conversation with us, but it is for you. And so if you have a particular thing that you're thinking about, or this sparked an idea, we would love for you guys just to reach out to us and join the conversation. Because like I said, it's not just the four of us having conversations with random people. Like our hope and our prayer in this is that you guys would partner with us. And so if this has sparked something in you to further the conversation, please join us and shoot us an email. We would love to hear more from you guys. But with that said, I will just say thank you so much for listening. We'd be so honored, as I said earlier, just to share our podcast with your youth pastor friends on social media, or tag a specific episode that really stood out to you on your favorite platform by using @TalkStudentMen. Finally, if you guys would actually like to be with us on the show in the future, please reach out to us on social media, or you can send us an email at podcast@studentministryconversations.org. We would love to set up a time for you to join us. Have a great week, and we will catch you guys on the next one.